Thank you for joining us for the Katz Innovation webinar series. We're going to talk today for about 20-30 minutes and then open it up for question and discussion. Before we go forward, I just want to touch upon a couple logistical things. Right now, you're on mute, and if you're not on mute, please mute yourself. Once we get to the discussion, we'll open that up again. We are recording this webinar so that folks who couldn't join us but who wanted to be a part of it will have the record of that. And my colleague Erica has graciously agreed to field any questions that you might have during the webinar. So if there's something that comes up that you want us to speak to, please just write it in the chat. Erica will make a list, and at the end, we'll start here. Okay, again, welcome to Beyond Engagement, Learning from UX and Social Architecture. I'm Faith Leaner. I work in the Office of Innovation and at Penn Hillel as a Innovation Fellow. This year, we started a new partnership between OOI and Penn, and one of our first projects was the Katz Innovation Summit, which was held at Hillel's Global Assembly last month in Orlando. And this webinar series really grew out of that collaboration, and we were just beginning to, this will only be the beginning of what we hope is a continuing discussion on a lot of new ideas about how might we reimagine and reinvigorate our work. Just as a reminder, Dan Smokler, the Chief Innovation Officer, is going to be presenting today. And before we jump in and I hand it off to Dan, we just wanted to make sure that we told you explicitly what we hope that you get out of this webinar. So we have 3 goals for today. We hope that you get a better understanding of the scholarship and theoretical underpinnings behind A, social networks, and B, user experience. We hope that you learn today how social networks can be used both as an organizing model and as an educational modality. And we hope that you'll walk away with some concrete examples on how to create stronger social networks and cultivate richer user experiences in an effort to build sustaining communities. Finally, just as a note, you'll see as we go through the slides that we're going to be skipping through some. That's because we've tried to include some of the sources that we're going to be referencing today. Not to worry, we will be sending everyone those slides following this webinar so that you'll have them for your reference, and you should feel free to share them with your staff and any colleagues or friends that you may have. So with no further ado, I'm going to hand over the computer and the video to James Smokler.
Hi, folks. Good afternoon. It's wonderful to spend a few minutes with you. We're going to talk through 2 basic ideas, social networks and user experience. Please feel free to go back to the slides. You don't have to pay close attention to them right now. But we're just going to try and get inside 2 ideas. The first of those is social networks. This is really pioneered by a guy named Nick Christakis, who's at Yale University, and his colleague Fowler. They wrote a book called Connected and have done just innumerable studies on how social networks interact and what we can learn about those structures in particular. So let's get into the idea first of what is a social network. Social network is just a set of relationships between people. It can be really simple, like a line of relationships, or it can be really complex. It can be highly structured and organized, or it can be all tied up and messy. What's key about social networks, which is your friends of friends, and your friends of friends of friends, is that you can learn a lot about your behavior if we look at who you know. So if we ask a person who their friends of friends of friends are, we can actually predict better than random if that person smokes, if they exercise, whether they're losing or gaining weight these days, where they like to shop, what kinds of television shows they might watch, what kind of music they listen to, how they vote, and yes, even what they do Jewishly. So let me just say that one more time. Your friends of friends of friends. Those are people that you probably don't even know their name and certainly have never met. Friends of friends of friends. If I know whether or not they smoke or have Shabbat dinner or whether they're going to the gym, I can predict better than random what you do. Your social network matters and it influences your behavior. Let's just go forward. We said just a minute ago that a social network can be organized in a highly uniform fashion. For instance, I'm going through like a line here as a bucket brigade, right? So that's one person, or a telephone tree tells another person, tells another person, tells another person, where you pass information A social network can function where it sort of diffuses out. You call one person who calls two people, who calls more people. It can be like a military squad where it's highly organized and interconnected, or it can be more like what many of us experience on campus. That there are some people who are highly connected and talk to lots of other people, and there are some folks that are less connected and talk to fewer people. What's important is that entire network or that set of relationships, that ecology influences people. Now, why do we want to think about that? Because we are in the business of cultivating and curating social networks. If we talk to people in one-on-one relationships over a period of time, that is not as powerful a way to move people into Jewish life as it is to move them into a social network. What do I mean by that? If a person only has a dyadic relationship, meaning talking to a Hillel staffer or an engagement intern, they're not as deep in the network as if they have many different relationships and conversations going on with people. So if we had to put this in context, there was a time where we thought the way to work with Jewish college students was run a program, which is generate content and get people into a space to hear that content. We then shifted to a model where we said we should be engaging people primarily through one-on-one relationships with staff and engagement interns. Also great and works with people. I'm advocating something a little bit more complex perhaps or sophisticated, which is to say that not only do we want to have one-on-one relationships with people, and not only do we want to deliver content, but we want to think about how we get people into a network. How do we curate that network and create spaces that are highly social for people so they can interact with lots and lots of different people? I realize that's a significant amount of information just to begin, and we get into the questions part of what we're talking about. We'll unpack that just a little bit more. So I want to introduce a second idea, which is the experience economy, and then I want to connect these two ideas with you. The experience economy is essentially a book from Penn and Gilmore. They're sort of like business guru-y types. I don't purport this as like God's honest truth. It's just a very interesting take on a reality that we all experience. And the argument goes like this. You definitely do not need to read this book. We can summarize it for you pretty quickly. It goes like this. There was a time where people sought out goods. Goods are things made from commodities. So if a commodity is like grain, there was a time where people wanted goods made from grain, which is like a loaf of bread. And then people sought beyond that services, which would be like someone to deliver your bread to you or make a sandwich for you. And what Penn and Gilmore is saying is now there's a space in the economy where people don't just want the service, which is the delivery of food, or the good, which is the bread, or the commodity, which is the wheat. They want the experience. They want the chavaya, the whole total body experience of eating an artisanal bread in a hipster shop that has a story behind it in a transformed space where the waiter comes and makes kind of chatty conversation with you. Or if there was a time where people sought primarily to get services, like to say ship a package from one place to another or have a delivery show up, people still do that, but they're increasingly looking for experiences. So what are some experiences in the experience economy? Let me offer just a couple brands that do this very, very well. Virgin Airlines, if anyone's ever flown Virgin Airlines, it's just an airline. It gets you from point A to point B. It's the exact same service as United, Delta, or Southwest. What's different about Virgin is the experience. When you come in to check in, they have a kind of tongue-in-cheek, cool video kiosk. They have an orchid at the counter for you. They're playing music. It's usually kind of like upbeat, sunshine, reggae-ish music. They have hipster people that talk to you in a sassy way and like black outfits as opposed to like flight attendant gear. The lighting is all purple and red. When you step on the airplane is colored in a kooky way. It's like purple color, plexiglass. They don't just have drinks. They like have a kind of bar vibe to it. So they basically spent a very small amount of money doing all these little touch-ups. But the net effect of it is when one flies Virgin, you're not paying for the service of going from New York to LA or something like that. You're paying for the experience of flying like a rock star. And they can charge you a premium for that. What people want out of Virgin is the experience. When a person goes to, say, the Apple store, it's not just to get a computer, because you can get the same thing at Best Buy if you want. But going to the Apple store is a chavaya. It's an experience of a exquisitely clean, beautifully designed place, just illuminated by gorgeous objects, hip and interesting people everywhere. And you can think of many, many places that are able to generate that sense of experience. It can be on the cool side of the economy, or it can be on the more mundane side of the economy. Dave & Buster's is an experience. The hot wings are every bit as good as their competitors, like Chili's or Hooters or Applebee's, whatever it is. But Dave & Buster's, there's an experience, like you get to play skee ball and you're having a fun night. And even though you're getting the same stuff you get anywhere else, somehow it feels like a more totalizing experience. So I've used the word experience many times. What do we mean by it? It's a rather general term. So there's basically three key components to an experience. One is an implicit moral aspiration. What that means is people who do the experience economy are promising a kind of self. When you get on Virgin, you're a rock star. When you buy from Apple, you're either cool or sophisticated. You appreciate good design. You appreciate high quality made products. When you go to Dave & Buster's, you're having fun. It's like a guy's night out. When you're at the gym, like Equinox, which is a very strong brand, or Soul Cycle, it's a particular fitness ethos. It's a kind of self it's projecting forward. It's highly curated, which means nothing is happenstance. Every single detail, from the orchid at the check-in to the shape of the boarding pass on Virgin, from the kind of menu at Dave & Buster's to the way the waitress or waiter talks to you, from the way you walk into the Apple store, every detail is curated and is thoughtful. Okay, so what's the opposite of that? The DMV. When you go and get your license renewed and you're standing in line, or the TSA at an airport. And as you're in line, you can think of 50 different ways you could make this experience better. If you can think of those 50 different ways, you're not in a curated experience. You're in a happenstance experience. And then all senses are engaged. If you go into the Apple Store or Virgin or Equinox or Soul Cycle or Dave & Buster's, there's music, there's lighting, there's a very particular scent. I guarantee you there's like a scent consultant who's making the air smell a certain way. They're giving you certain kinds of looks and aesthetics and foods. The entire experience is being engaged. What I want to suggest is that you can actually do this from the beginning, what we would say lechatchila, or a priori. You can imagine doing your work in a way that is social by design, that consciously constructs social networks through user experience. Let me just say it one more time. We construct social networks through user experience, meaning when we do something in the Jewish community, rarely do we say, what is the kind of self that we want to project to our students? How do we engage that with a series of thoughtful, very thoughtful choices, ranging from the font we use, to the language that we choose, to the lighting in the room, to the way we shape a program or an interaction, to where we choose to meet people. Rarely do we think about how do we maximize sociality in an experience by introducing people to one another, by having mentors available, by creating pro-social experiences over food or with music or with lighting. Instead, we put a huge amount of emphasis on the one-on-one and on the content. What I'm suggesting is that there's a whole world in between. I think I want to offer two examples of how we do this in our office of social architecting and social by design. These are the Jewish Learning Fellowship and BASE. So I'll just speak to these and I'll offer a few techniques and then we'll take questions. So the Jewish Learning Fellowship, many of you have on your campuses, is something that started at NYU and we scaled up to about 20 campuses. But the Jewish Learning Fellowship, while it's a 10-week seminar that discusses Jewish texts in a conversational format, it seeks to also cultivate social networks. So we work very hard when we teach folks how to run JLF to think about what is the space that you're using, the lighting that you're creating, the kind of food that you're serving. We don't call it food, we call it tapas instead, because it's a little bit more playful, a little bit more pro-social, about having mentors in a space, about inviting people to coffee after the meeting. Each of those choices, how we set up the room, how we tell students what we're doing with our work, how we work with them afterwards, speak to a kind of total experience that JLF presents a moral aspiration or a vision of the self where you are a member of a community with Jewish friends who likes to learn and feels at home in this particular space. We emphasize that through aesthetic choices in the experience, and we hope that you make social relationships, and we go to great lengths to match you up to people and to create ways for you to do that. One other example of a place where we try and do this is BASE. BASE is a program that we run through the Office of Innovation. It's the home of a rabbinic couple, meaning a rabbi and spouse, who use their home to serve young people with learning, hospitality, and service. So Shabbat meals, holiday meals, learning, and service projects. In BASE, we go to great lengths to invite people individually and in small groups to come participate in an intimate, warm, social setting where the aesthetics of the home are carefully chose, where a meal is thoughtfully staged, and where language is painstakingly used. So it's not a set of programs or recruitments. God forbid there's no Jewish puns, right? There's no like, hookah on the sukkah, chew with the Jew, or things like that. If we don't want to pun Jewishly, because the aesthetic that communicates might be different from what we're actually going for. But instead, we try and onboard people into a pro-social space so that when they leave BASE, they say, wow, not only was that warm, inviting, engaging, so thoughtfully done, but I have a group of friends. So let me just offer a few techniques for how you do that. Some of these are, we have to set the tone ourselves, which is to say, what is the aesthetic we want to communicate? What's the moral vibe and the aspiration we're communicating to people? And then how do we make choices to do that? So that involves the language we use, the font we select, the lighting, the setup of the building, all these things. And yes, does it take a lot of time? It takes an enormous amount of time, but it's worthwhile. And how do we then sort of onboard people, this phrase I'm using, into social networks? Well, we can dial down social anxiety. And some examples of that are by deputizing students to be wingmen, by saying to folks like, look, I really need you to be in this space with me. There's some new people here. I want you to be their wingman. By being personal, learning everyone's name ahead of time, making it a goal that you'll never not know someone's first name. By using food as a mechanism to create sociality. So it's not just like a bunch of pizza on a table, but it's allow me to introduce you to this hors d'oeuvre that you can have over a conversation with another person. And we can also foreground, or what's called prescribing the symptom ahead of time, where we tell people what you're going to expect, and we deliver it, and then we tell them what happened, and we watch as they repeat it afterwards. So you say something like, in JLF, you're going to make a group of new friends. And when they get there, we say, we hope while you're here, you're really reaching out and making new friends. And at the end, we say, we hope this experience has allowed you to make some new friends. And then you watch, by the end, the students look it up and say, wow, we made some new friends. So it's really communicate what we're doing. Thinking thoughtfully about how to create a sense of hospitality. So that involves everything from lighting, not having oppressive overhead fluorescent lighting, not feeling like an office, but redesigning it so there's a sort of beautiful ambient kind of space. If that's the vibe you're going for, there are other vibes that you could potentially create, and deputizing students to help you think through and then iterate, which is to say refine the process. So do it once and then ask yourself, like, what can we do to make it better? Finally, there's something important about the language and expectations in all this. If we tell people that we're trying to create social relationships, we can headline that to students that we're talking to. We hope by the end of this experience you make new friends. Or when people walk in and say, I know that you were meant to be here in order to meet so-and-so. I really hope that in this room you find a mentor. Using that kind of language sets the expectation for people that they should be on the lookout for something social. So just to conclude this section, we talked about the idea of social networks, which is the design of a set of relationships. And the person's behavior can be influenced by what happens in those social networks. The design can be linear, like a bucket brigade. It can be complex, like a military squad or a telephone tree. But usually it's sort of organic and sinewy, as we have on campus. We've argued that you can actually cultivate social networks by using language, introductions, how we stage a room, and how we organize our activities so that people can be onboarded. And the mechanism for doing that is another aspect we call the user experience, which we draw from the which we draw from the experience economy, which is an idea that people are looking not only for goods and services, but for an entire gestalt experience that involves a moral aspiration, a sense of self, something that's multi-sensory, and something that's thoughtful and highly curated. And finally, I asked just briefly, how could we apply that to a Hillel context? What would it mean if when a student interacted with Hillel, whether it's online, a phone call, a text, in an in-building experience or out, they thought to themselves every time, this is so thoughtful. Every choice has been carefully made to project a certain kind of ethos, and that is allowing me to feel more and more ensconced in a group of friends. So I'll just conclude right there and see if we have questions, comments, thoughts, or reactions from the participants who are with us. Faith.
I'm just going to read out one question that we received from, I think, Adina and Emily. So I'm going to read what they've written us, and Dan, you can speak to it, and then we can go from there.
Sure.
So still thinking on the slide from a few, the birthday party, and curious thoughts on the fact we seem to be having a cultural moment of starting over again, i.e. friends would rather make their own Betty Crocker cake with Pinterest touches versus ever going to Chuck E. Cheese. Wondering on thoughts from the group on the balance between cachet experiences that professionals create versus warm homegrown ones. Do we go with the big splashy fancy catered dinner or the homemade one?
It's an interesting question. I'm not sure that there's actually a dichotomy between those two things. Our base couples, for instance, are running very intimate home experiences that are highly curated. So they're both intimate and warm, but professionally driven. I don't think that things that happen from professionals need to have caterers. When we ran JLF at NYU, we literally did $10 worth of appetizers and some twinkle lights and a velvet curtain. But it was created by professionals, but the idea was to create a sort of home atmosphere. It depends where you are on campus. So to what extent do you understand who your clientele, who the students are, and how can you create a moral aspiration, an image of themselves that is 2 steps beyond where they want to be so they can aspire to it and can sense it in the choices that you're making. Other questions?
Friends, if you are on mute and you'd like to ask a question, we invite you to unmute yourselves. You can either write again into the chat, or since no one is jumping up, you could just unmute yourself and go ahead and ask Dan a question. While you're thinking, I'm going to go ahead and ask Dan a question. Dan, we recently were talking with another team about this, and I was curious of why you think why this could feel difficult to a team, or what might inhibit or stop a team from going forward with this. Like what are the barriers why haven't we been doing this for 20 years?
It's an interesting question. I think, we haven't really thought about networks so much until now because they haven't really been brought to the forefront. They haven't been studied. We've thought about relationships with individuals and groups. Who's in the group and who's the individual, and what's my relationship to the group? But the idea of being a part of a whole network is something of a new idea that we're realizing that the technology has, to a certain extent, allowed us to experience. The idea of curating an experience, whenever I talk about that with Hillel professionals, what they usually say back is that it takes too much time and thought, and that it's too arduous. And that, do we really have to set up the room each time? I mean, does it really matter where I put the chairs? It sounds so trivial and so nitpicky. And the only thing I can say back to that is that people notice. People notice when you create a total experience, and it's the difference between dazzling someone and allowing them to have a sort of total feeling and having something be kind of just nice. There's nothing wrong with just nice. It's totally good and sufficient. But there's another level beyond that where people feel like you're putting thought and detail into every aspect. Finally, I would suggest that this is actually what ritual life is. There's a reason why a Shabbat table is set up with a very particular staging, why a Kiddush cup is supposed to be held in your hand with your fingers up around it. There's an elaborate choreography to invoke a kind of experience and ritual. And what I'm just suggesting is that we put that into other experiences as well.
Other questions?
Hey Dan, this is Gabriel. How you doing? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Gabriel. Go ahead.
Great. So I did JLF this past semester, and I found myself using words like tapas and twinkly lights, and then just feeling like this was just not me. This was you. This was me doing Dan Smokler at JLF. So I'm wondering what advice you have for people to kind of discover the a curated atmosphere and vibe that is more genuine.
Yeah, I would say, Gabriel, you do you. Like you and I like different kinds of music. We wear different kinds of outfits. We like different kinds of spaces. So
I don't wear outfits, but we do like kinds of music, though. We have that in common.
Well, we both like Coltrane. That's interesting. And but you do wear outfits. I've seen them, and I like them sometimes. I would say, like, why not do you? Meaning, create a space that is authentically a representation of who you are as a person, right? I don't think the ultimate word on aesthetics is tapas and twinkly lights. The point of it is to say that create an aesthetic space that's coherent. Like you could not find two spaces that are more different than Dave & Buster's and the Apple Store, but both are authentic to what they're doing. They're total experiences and they're exceedingly thoughtful. By contrast, when I went to the city of New York to get registered as an officiant for a wedding, you could not find like a more thoughtless happenstance space than like the city government building of New York for records. So all I'm saying is create a thoughtful space that reflects you. So I don't know what that is for you, if that's sandalwood and patchouli or whether that's like mint and something else, but it should be thoughtful so that people notice every detail and take it seriously. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. I'm just looking for, suggestions and other people's thinking about that, what successes they've had in finding that.
Sure.
I also, we have very limited space here. We don't have a room that we can designate for JLF. We actually struggle to find the right kind of space, and we can't keep it decorated the whole time. So anyway, I'm just saying it's not simple, as you've already acknowledged.
It's definitely not simple. Like I did this, like I had a dorm room at Yale that was like a 14 by 14 foot room that we redecorated every Friday night for Shabbos by hanging curtains and, like flowers on the wall, random things in there. And it read like, early impoverished grad student, but it had a vibe to it. So one can have a vibe at a lot of different kinds of spaces. Sounds like we got a question in the chat.
Yeah, we do. Okay, so the question is, here we are about to have admitted students weekend, and can you speak to how to curate a set of experiences so that by next August, we have begun to establish the network that you're speaking about?
We have admitted by next August, meaning before they get to campus?
I think so. And I think it doesn't say the name of who did this, although it's from Texas Hillel. So if you want to clarify any of your question, feel free. But I think the question is about how can you maybe build a curated set of experiences so that network is like in place by admitted students?
That's an excellent question. So the short answer is I have absolutely no idea, but I'm going to think out loud with you right now as to how I might do that if I were in your shoes. If I had a group of admitted students and I wanted to build a network with them from now until they showed up in August, what I would think through is what's the set of communications that they should have between now and then. So something like they should probably have an initial thoughtful welcoming email or letter. I would even handwrite letters to people from your staff welcoming them. That has a really serious impact when you get a handwritten letter. So let's say you have like 200 new students. Okay, so you divide it up. It's like thank you notes and a bar mitzvah. I would send, I would handwrite it, whether it's postcards or letters. I would ask those people if they would like to come for a special visit to have a one-on-one over coffee or a lunch. I would see if those people are available within an hour's drive to go meet them individually. I would have older students contact them and say, I just want to welcome you to campus if you have any questions, and I would figure out how to curate that. So if they're older students that have something in common, same geographic locality, same athletic interests, same kind of academic interests, might be living in the same place on campus, just to welcome you there. I would ask them ahead of time if they had plans for the holidays, if they'd like to be invited for a holiday in the fall when they first get to campus. I would even contact their parents and see if they'd like to be invited for a meal when they get there. So each of those contacts is a way of making them feel like they're personally engaged with a staff member. Using a handwritten letter offers a kind of more aesthetic and comfortable experience. It's all personal, so it's not email blasts or sign up for my list, which is completely impersonal. And then it's time to match them up with students as well beyond just the staff. And finally, it might be worthwhile to have some kind of an event for those folks to come together and meet one another, for class. And Darren, I think you're off mute. You want to jump in?
What's that?
I have a question.
Oh, we got another question in the chat.
Yeah. Okay, so if your building is older and has fluorescent lighting, definitely looks a bit aged, what minor inexpensive things can we do to the surface of our building without changing furniture, flooring, etc.? Our Hillel has a 5+ year plan to remodel, but for the time being, what small edits can we make to the inside of the building? This is from Northwestern.
Okay, so this is from Northwestern. Northwestern says we have fluorescent lighting in an old building. We're going to remodel. How do we edit the building? I'm going to offer a few ideas, but there are people on this call that are more creative than I am. I'm not an interior decorator. I'm just suggesting that you change the vibe. So guys, we all know how to do that. You can buy some floor lamps. You can cover the fluorescent lights with a clear plastic shield. Like, I mean, I think there's a great theater program at Northwestern, so they must have gels that you put over lights. The gels cost probably, 5 cents. You can buy a small rug off eBay that's used that you put into a room. You can light candles. You can buy plants, real or fake. You can put little wheatgrass in jars there. You can assemble rikki-tikki things in an interesting shape. Like, I just want to point out, if you look where I'm sitting right here, I'm in a WeWork building, right? And WeWork is this, right? Like, this is an interesting touch here.
He's gone rogue.
On the wall of WeWork, they've put up these 3 pieces of wood that they screwed in the wall. That's interesting. I don't know. It costs them maybe 5 cents to do that. WeWork does things like they buy old, used, broken telephones. They put 6 of them in a pile. They create kind of interesting, weird, modern spaces, but it's not in any way expensive. It's just fun and playful. Now, again, that might not be the ethos for your Hillel. Your Hillel might not want to be fun and playful. I'm not suggesting that I have the aesthetic that you should adhere to. All I'm saying is, what are the number of ways that you can creatively make the space feel different, right? So that could be music. That could be a concierge that greets people. That could be offering, at Shabbat dinner, as opposed to having a buffet, having the staff go around holding hors d'oeuvres in their hand and offering them to people. There's a lot of different ways to do that.
So Dan, partially of what I'm hearing is that in order to do this, teams might need to get together and kind of have a aesthetic conversation of like, what are the 5, the language you use, moral aspirations that we have? What is the vibe that we want to communicate? And then as you're planning programs or purchases, you're checking in with those and saying, is this informed by the values that we spoke about?
Right, and then you want to iterate it, and iterate just means constantly refine. So it's like, if someone says to you, give me a workout, and the workout is like squats, pull-ups, and burpees, right? You can't do that forever. You have to iterate it and refine it and make it better over time. Or if you know how to cook something, you learn how to cook other things. So if your Shabbat dinner is like fluorescent lighting, the screaming kind of summer camp benching with the kid making Kiddush out loud, like yelling on top of everyone, terrible announcements being made from a chair, maybe you want to try and do it different one time. And then iterate and say what worked, what didn't work, how do we refine? We have a question from the chat.
A comment and 2 comments and then another question. So one comment from Adara is, I want to suggest utilizing students' homes, alternating to a few different people's spaces, so they can they in turn can take hosting, and we can help provide the food. So that's empowering students as co-hosters. And I think a question that I was thinking about, Dan, was to what extent students play a role in this curation?
Students are great for it. Remember, there are some students who have great taste. I happen to believe most students don't have great taste. They tend to have kind of like dorm room taste, which is okay. But you sometimes need to show people what much better looks like so that they can get excited about it and go do it themselves. If they've never seen better, they don't really know what better looks like. So one thing you can do is you can take a conference room in a Hillel building and redecorate it and have a student co-host it with you. Where a staff person says, I'm going to host a special dinner. And you come up with some vibe for dinner. This is going to be a dinner where we sing. It's a fabrengen, it's a singing dinner. Or this is a dinner where we're going to tell Torah. Or this is a dinner where we're going to reflect on the current events of the day. You curate and invite a list of 20 people personally. They come to the dinner, and you actively host that space as a staff person with different kinds of greetings, with hand washing, person to person, meaning I'm washing your hands, with different sort of elements in the table. Like I once went to a guy's house for Shabbat where he made hamotzi over 12 loaves of bread instead of 2, which I found to be very interesting. It was like a minhag that he had. And by showing the student how to host in that space in the building, they can then, begin by imitating and then iterating that.
I want to invite Leah. I know that you say that you've had a comment in response to Gabrielle's question. So if you want to unmute yourself and hop on, we'd love to hear what you have to say.
Sure. And also just to the larger conversation about curation. So one of the things that I care about in terms of my teaching and personal pedagogy is writing and inviting students to write. And so instead of buying them a Mead notebook, I found a really beautiful journal on Amazon for $9 a journal that had a painting by Gustav Klimt of Tree of Life.
Nice painting.
And in the first session, here I can try and start my video. I don't know if you can see me, but
it's a great painting.
It's amazing. And then in the first session, I talked about the concept of hidor mitzvah and beautification, and that our learning is aesthetic, and it's not just about being together and having a conversation. It's about aspiring towards making ourselves better people, and that the journal should remind us of that every time we do it. And what's more is that they have it for all of their Jewish learning for the next few years, because it's a thick enough journal that they can do that. So just an example of something that I care about, that I thought about how to bring aesthetic to it. And then the second thing I'll say in terms of the point that's being made about space is, I think that there's an opportunity to think about, when I come home from work and I walk into my house after a really long day, how do I want my living room to feel for me when I come home? What art do I want to look at on the walls? What do I want to feel when I'm in my space? And we can do the same thing for students. I think there's great stuff on Pinterest, and there's an amazing decorating website that's really accessible called Domino Magazine. But just taking the time to think about what kind of space would you want to walk into, and then curating that for students after a long day of classes, I think is a starting point to making it a space that feels different from what they're used to when they walk into a Hillel building.
I'd like to add something on that if I could, which is I don't want people to leave the webinar saying, we did a webinar with Penn and the Office of Innovation. They said everyone should be an interior decorator. That would be the wrong takeaway, which I know is not what I'm suggesting. And Leah, who's extraordinarily thoughtful about aesthetics, isn't suggesting that either. But there is a way to do this such that it becomes a teaching tool. Like Leah mentioned astutely, the idea of Hidur Mitzvah with the beautification of a mitzvah. You can do this in a lot of different ways. So I want to give you one example of how you can do it at a Shabbat table. If you take a Shabbat table, I often will preset it ahead of time with a beautiful tablecloth, and then put out olive oil and sea salt. I'll then put out the 7 species from the land of Israel, right? Dates and pomegranates and almonds, olive oil, milk, etc. Put that all out in front of everyone. And then the challah, the wine, and the candles on the table. And as I'm hosting that meal, I'll narrate why each of those things is there in a non-annoying, non-didactic way. Say, we have the Shabbat candles here because really the purpose of Shabbat candles is to have a meal in light for Shalom Bayit, so that we can have peace among one another and not step in each other's food, not have arguments, but be able to see each other. So we place the candles here on the table. We put the salt on the bread because blah, 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 blah. And because of that, there's 10 different kinds of salt here. There are 7 species from the land of Israel that we like to eat before Kiddush, so we can say extra blessings on them. So what I've done is taken the aesthetic elements and rendered them pedagogic by making each of them a teaching opportunity for a different aspect about the halachot of Shabbat.
Okay, we have 2 more questions, and I think that'll probably be most of our time for today. So I think this is again from Adara. There's a lot of emphasis on the physical space, which is important. However, can you speak more about fostering a space, physical, the way we frame or educate, that promotes moral aspirations and a sense of self? What does it look like? Do you need any clarification on that? Or just
Yeah, can you just read the last part one more time, Faith?
Sure, or Adara, if you want to unmute yourself, you're welcome to frame the question in a way yourself.
Can you hear me? See
Yes, yes, we can.
Hi, you're Zoom. Hi, everyone. No, Dan, this is really helpful and very much the way I look about creating services and space. So I'm excited for this. I think what you mentioned something about promoting a sense of students getting to a space about thinking their moral aspirations and their sense of self. And I just wanted to know, utilizing all this, can you give some concrete examples of what that actually looks like?
Yeah. So I'll give you examples.
Thanks.
First of all, again, I'll take Shabbat dinner to NYU as a concrete example. I had a year or 2 where I ran a Shabbat dinner at NYU. So I would have everyone who came in the room, the first thing I would say is, Good Shabbos, can I take your coat? And that would offer, in my offering to take their coat, a sense of hosting. And then I would walk people out of the room when they left. And I would say to them, we always walk guests out of the room when we leave. That's another halakha. We walk them a certain distance of accompanying people. In the way that we comport ourselves at the meal, meaning not having a cellular device on Shabbat, speaking words of Torah to people, making sure that folks know that we're aware of people that are not able to be at the meal or able to eat. I remember there's a period of time where I took out the trash a lot. I spent a lot of time hauling the trash downstairs. And this one woman, Molly Goldmeyer, this amazing woman, I said to me, I noticed you're always taking the trash out. She said, why are you doing that? And I said, well, it's privilege. It's a privilege to do that because it's a privilege to host Shabbat, and getting involved in the down and dirty of this meal is also a privilege. So now, did I like doing that? No, I hate taking out the trash. Let's say I actually hate it, but that's a teachable moment where you can express to someone that doing the mundane logistics of something is actually a part of its kedusha. There's a famous Gemara about that. So after a while, I noticed Molly Goldmire would take out the trash. And she probably didn't need me to tell her to do it. She's too good of a person for that. But it communicates a certain kind of ethos to people, of always wanting to find seats for folks, or making a meal very social, of not shouting in public because it's a holier kind of space. So we don't want to scream an announcement and so on, because it's actually like it's a special makom kadosh. It's like a holy place, right? So those are ways to communicate an ethos or an aspiration.
Great, thank you.
Okay, I think this will be our last question.
Sure.
So this is from Jonathan Romani, one of our Springboard Fellows. Hey. Okay, so how do we bring this to student leaders and teach them the value of experiential learning and social by design?
It's a long process, right? You can't like do a seminar and have people walk away and say, now I'm bought in, I'm just going to go do it. You have to show them and really dazzle them with something special, reflect on it with them, and subtly offer improvements or iterations along the way. I just want to remind you that there was a time in Hillel when I first started where introducing content and Torah into the public spaces of Hillel was really, really uncool. It was not what you did. And is not something students were not interested in content. They were interested in clubs and barbecues and fun. And we had to sort of fight an uphill battle, many of my colleagues and me as the youngest among them, to try and add more content into some parts of Hillel, something that the elder statesmen of the organization had always been advocating for. So that didn't happen one day, it took years. So what I'm suggesting is that Hillel could imagine becoming a much more thoughtful social place with better aesthetics, and we do it drip by drip by drip, interaction by interaction. So when a student's putting together an event and the pizza just goes on the table, say, you know what, why don't we stage this in a nicer way? And they say, oh, who really cares? I say, sometimes people notice. I'm going to bring flowers for this particular moment, right? And sort of thinking through all those kinds of details.
Great. Dan, thank you so much for today. I think we're going to try to make these webinars 45 minutes and not an hour because you guys all have a lot going on. So I just wanted to invite you all to our next webinar on February 21st at 11 a.m. with Penn Hillel Executive Director Mike Urim. He's going to be talking to us about a chapter from his new book, which just won the Jewish Book Award, about how disruptive innovation can be applied to our work. And I'm just going to let Dan close us down.
Guys, it's wonderful to spend a short period of time with you. I really, really appreciate you taking a few moments to listen to me blabber on about any of this stuff. And I just want to make sure that you know that I'm available and our team is available here. If you ever want to think through any of these ideas, how to build a social network or how to, social architect a space or user experience in your campus, we'd be more than happy to talk with you, to come out to your campus and to think it through with you as well. We welcome your feedback on this webinar, and your thoughts, comments, questions, or critiques. Please don't hesitate to be in touch and let us know how we can improve. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.